In today's episode, I'll discuss cheap suburbs in Melbourne. What I mean by this is cheap suburbs that are worth buying in Melbourne, because there's suburbs that are very cheap, but they're not worth buying in. So that's what I'm going to get into. Couple of things today. First of all, what drives Melbourne's property market? Second of all, the minimum purchase price you need to get into the market. And then finally, the cheap suburbs being under 750k, 750k to $1 million, 1 to 1.5 million, 1.5 to 2 million, and $2 million plus. Let's get into it. Look, what drives Melbourne's property market is quite similar to Sydney. First of all, again, like every city, the demographics do drive the market, and that goes along with access to higher end employment, so higher paying jobs and business demand. Alongside that is your lifestyle areas, so the time it takes to go from work to to lifestyle precincts and back home. And then also your school zones there do play a very big part of the market. In Melbourne as well, because you do have areas that do have a lot of land supply out, in the outer suburbs, a large part also plays in raw undersupply in the market, so not much for sale and not much incoming for sale, and also the excess demand combined with that of a wealthy income demographic. So wealthy people wanting to move into suburbs with no land supply. That's a very, very good thing for the Melbourne property market. Look, your minimum purchase price in Melbourne, because it has come back a little bit, it's actually very advantageous for a lot of people buying now. It's actually 730,000 or so now, and it is suburb dependent, but that is an incredible price to buy for. It's nearly what you can buy for in Perth now, which is insane, and it is a much better long-term performing market than Perth. So it's my favourite place to buy at the moment in all of Australia. But let's start really with Melbourne, and let's start with under 750k in Melbourne. And the suburb I really like here is a suburb called Braybrook. So look, Braybrook previously, believe it or not, for people that don't know, it was previously known as the Bronx of Melbourne. So a lot of housing commission, a lot of social issues, a lot of problems there. If you're looking at census data in 2006 alone, and even before that, about 64% of the suburb was housing commission. That number is under 20% today. And funny enough, even more of it's being sold off. And funny enough, actually, of that 19%, a large proportion of that is actually just elderly housing. So it's not even like dodgy housing commission or anything like that. A lot of it, when I say a lot of it, I mean about half of that alone is housing for sort of more elderly residents who don't have a lot of money. So you have people like war vets and stuff like that, and you're completely harmless. You have no issues around where those are as well. So, when I say 19%, it's more like 10% that is actually kind of you're probably more problematic problems of the suburb. So for people that don't know that, there's some information for you. But Braybrook first is actually going through gentrification. It's largely due to the regeneration project and what the government's actually doing there. So look, it only sits about 9 to 10 k's away from the CBD. It's very short bus ride, short drive, and also a short train ride into the CBD if you're close to West Footscray station. Now, look, Braybrook, don't get me wrong, it does still have some dodgy pockets, but the income has nearly tripled there in the last 15 years, and it's only getting better. So it is actually gentrifying now, so you don't want to be too late for this. And it's actually a top 50 performing suburb in the country, believe it or not, and it'll continue to be that way. And the jobs in the CBD are great. It's not overly far from Tullamarine, which is also another large, employer. And the Sunshine Precinct, and particularly the hospital precinct and the government industry that's going out, there's only going to improve the demographics as well. So it's definitely a good suburb to consider in Braybrook in Melbourne. Another one I want to just describe to people is also similar to probably Braybrook, and that's Heidelberg Heights and Heidelberg West. Now, I've combined both suburbs together because they're kind of right next to each other. Heidelberg Heights is a little bit better than Heidelberg West, but it's a particular area I'm talking about. Now, the reason why this is such a good suburb to buy in is because you're still picking up large blocks in this suburb, and the council's very development pro here. And the reason for that is because the whole nature of the suburb is changing. Now, Heidelberg Heights and Heidelberg West, before the 2010s and the early 2010s, was predominantly a housing commission suburb. But throughout the early 2000s and 2010s, it's basically all been sold off. So a lot of developers actually are holding the stock here and are actually developing on it. But those older homes and larger blocks outstanding, and they're in very hot demand, and it's because Heidelberg Heights and West are surrounded by all more expensive suburbs. So suburbs, for example, like Eaglemont, Rosanna, Watsonia, Bellfield, Ivanhoe, they're all much more expensive suburbs all around them. And what's happening here is you have a spillover effect into these suburbs. So you're getting builds like this and your professionals, particularly professional couples moving into them, developers doing things like this, and it's just changing the whole nature of the suburb. So for those, particularly if you just want to buy and hold and you want to develop in the long term, this is a great suburb to consider. Like, you're probably not finding a better one in the country than this to do that long term. Braybrook's probably up there, but in terms of capital growth, but for development, I mean, this council will let you do almost anything there. They're pretty good, like not anything, but talk to a town planner, but they'll know what I'm talking about when you talk to one anyway. Let's get into 750k to $1 million. And I did mention this previously. I'm going to mention it again because it's actually already grown a little bit since I last spoke, but it's Footscray. Footscray, I'd say for a lot of people, it's similar to kind of like your Marrickville or Sydney, for people that don't know. For people in Brisbane, I don't know if you can really compare it. It might be similar to somewhere like West End in Brisbane, kind of like Village there. But look, Footscray really is. It's 6 k's from the CBD. It's your multicultural hub kind of in Melbourne, in my opinion. Yes, it does have a stigma about it for 20 years ago, but it's not the same today. It has almost basically professional income in the suburb now, and it's only increasing as time goes by. It's a top 100 suburb of the country. And do I need to really say any more when I just show its location? It's just over the river, literally from West Melbourne straight into the CBD. By car, it takes maybe, even in peak hour traffic, maybe 20 minutes at max to get into at least where the employment kind of starts in North Melbourne and all that kind of thing. If you get the train, it's even less. It's like 10 minutes. You got, employment in the hospital precinct. You've got, the villages of Seddon and Kingsville, which do have heritage overlay, so they're not going to change. Really good location. Great if you love great restaurants. You can't get much better than Footscray, so definitely consider that. Let's go to another suburb, and now I'm not going to do the exact same thing I did last time because I do mention suburbs quite a lot. I'm actually going to mention another one, and that suburb is Bellfield. So look, Bellfield neighbours Ivanhoe, and it is close to, obviously, it's not overly far from, Preston, not far from Brunswick, not far from Ivanhoe East either, all, I'd say, upmarket suburbs. Bellfield actually did sell off most of its housing a long time ago, and it's mostly all owner occupiers on detached blocks. So this is an example of what one of them looks like. But you look at, all the suburbs around it, look at Ivanhoe East, look at Ivanhoe, look at, Thornbury, Northcote, Fairfield, look, all those suburbs, really expensive. You've got the hospital precinct right next door, good employment. It's within 12, 13 k's of the CBD, really, really good. Bellfield's not another outstanding opportunity. Don't miss out on something like that, especially if you want a large block in an area as well that actually has some quite good schools around it too. So definitely a suburb to consider, under $1 million. So it's surprising I even say that at the moment. So definitely consider Bellfield for that kind of money. Let's get into one of my favourite sort of price points for Melbourne. That's your $1 to $1.5 million range. And I'm mentioning a suburb I have mentioned before, but I cannot think of one of it like many better suburbs than this in the country to buy in. And that suburb is Yarraville. And yes, it's one I target regularly again, and it's for good reason. Look, Yarraville has, a beautiful village. Its location is incredible. It's like 7 k's from the CBD. You got the train line, bus transport around there. You got festivals that happen in Yarraville, markets that happen in Yarraville. Very high income in Yarraville, and just a really, really nice area to live. And Yarraville's gentrified incredibly over the last 15, 20 years, and it's only continuing to go how it's been going. But if you just look here, this is the Yarraville village. You can see in a festival and a time of night. Look, it's common for people to be all out to all hours of the night here and for it to be busy. Most people like walking a village centre or just come in from local suburbs. So really good for that. But just look at that income there. It's insane. So median weekly household income, and this is in 2021, so it's increased since then, $24.85 a week. Median monthly mortgage repayments, $2,500 a week. So in a week's earnings, people can afford their mortgage. And it's that's income of Sydney's Upper North Shore and Inner West. And you can still buy there for like 1.1 million. It's insane. I've picked up stock for even under $1 million in Yarraville, but I didn't think it was necessary to say it's under $1 million because it is quite hard to do that. But look, Yarraville, it is pretty much, I'd say, my top 10 in the country of suburbs to buy in. So one of my favourite locations, definitely something to consider between 1 and 1.5. And it's on the lower end of that, actually. So definitely consider Yarraville. Another suburb you should consider is a suburb called Cranbourne. And that suburb is, look, it's basically, I'd call it the MCG suburb of Melbourne. It's right next to the MCG and Richmond. And like, I mean, that suburb alone, like, the income of Cranbourne alone is literally like the second highest in all of Victoria. So you look at the income here, median weekly household income, $2,959 a week. Median monthly mortgage repayments, $2,300. And I mean, the only suburb with higher income than that is Kooyong. It's the only one in all of Melbourne with higher income than that. And that actually neighbours Kooyong, funny enough, just over the Yarra. So, I mean, look at it. I described just before how good Yarraville is in terms of income demographic. Cranbourne is even better, and it's also even closer to the city, and it neighbours the MCG and kind of your best lifestyle precincts, I'd say, of all of Melbourne for sport, especially Amy Park, Rod Laver Arena, all of that's just like walkable distance from the suburbs. So definitely consider Cranbourne. It's such an incredible suburb for that. Let's get into $1 to $2 million in Melbourne. $1.5 to $2 million is like an absolute premium for Melbourne. And it's crazy to say that. And it's crazy to even say that this suburb's even that price. And that suburb is Port Melbourne. Look, Port Melbourne, you're still picking up on the lower end of that price point. I mean, like 1.6-ish million you can still pick up Port Melbourne for. I've seen under 1.5, but they're probably not your best dwellings under that. But I mean, Port Melbourne, like it used, believe it or not, about 40, 50 years ago, used to actually have some public housing in Port Melbourne, quite a bit of it. A lot of the dockies and also, you sort of, I'd say bricks and mortar employees, those kinds of guys used to live there, but it's just gentrified like crazy. Like, and that happened about 20 years ago, and it's just gone up and up from there. But, it's basically one of your best suburbs in all of Melbourne. It's probably, again, like another top 10 suburb in Melbourne, like Yarraville. And I'd say it's once an industrial suburb, now a thriving gem. You got, the city like 2.5 to 3 k's away, right next to Albert Park. Probably, I'd say, your best suburb of all of Melbourne. Right by, like the docks, right by the yacht clubs. I mean, you can't go wrong buying Port Melbourne. Such a good suburb. There's a dog beach there as well if you like your pets. Great little village. You can't go wrong there. Let's get to another suburb. I find it crazy as well that this suburb's this price, and that suburb's Elwood. Look, Elwood's about 1.7 to 1.8 million. Now, the reason I like Elwood is it's so cheap for where it is. It's literally between Albert Park, St Kilda and Brighton. And it's actually quiet. There's basically no housing there. It's such a nice quiet suburb. You've got big blocks still there. And just look at where it is. Like, this should be, in my opinion, priced probably similarly to Brighton, and it's not. You got about a $1 million price difference just on Brighton alone in this suburb, which is just insane. And just look at it. Like, you look at what people even think of it. So it's just sought after by everyone. This is just an article from Domain. Elwood, the Bayside suburb full of dogs, prams and fit people. And that's a perfect way to describe it. It literally is probably one of the best locations in all of Melbourne to live. I can't think of a single person that lives in Elwood and says they don't like it. I know people that live there, both through business, both through clientele, and both through friends. I know plenty of people that live there, and they all love it. No one wants to leave. They think it's the best suburb in the world. So, look, if you got around that sort of $1.7, $1.8 million budget, reach out. I can definitely help you. Look, for everyone that is watching this episode and hasn't subscribed, please subscribe to this channel because it does help me a lot just before I get into probably the best suburb of all of Melbourne. And look, when I talk about the best suburb of all of Melbourne, we're talking about that $2 million plus range. And that suburb, in my opinion and a lot of people's opinion, is Albert Park. Very famous Albert Park, famous obviously for hosting, the Formula One. They shut down a lot of streets, they run the Formula One through it, but it's probably the most famous suburb of Melbourne. And a lot of people who I talk to say, this is where it's at. This is the suburb where everything happens. The best stuff, all the best stuff is. It's about 3K from the CBD. I mean, even if you look in articles, look, it fronts the harbour. It's got the most expensive land value to square metre in all of Melbourne. I think they price it at about 15,000 to a square metre at the moment. Should I say the Valuer General or the Land Valuations Victoria department? And look, everyone pretty much knows, nearly everyone, that it is the best suburb. So this is just an article again from the Domain, the inner city Melbourne burb that's almost too good to be true. And I mean, you've actually got, funny enough, in a lot of parts of Elwood Park, space to park your cars, believe it or not. You've got a beautiful beachfront village. You've got, I mean, one of the nicest parts of the harbour. Every bit of transport you need to get into the city, whether it's bus, light rail, or you just want to drive in, it's very close. It's not overly busy either. Some of the nicest parks as well there. So, look, that's your best suburb, in my opinion, in all of Melbourne. And long term, it's going to do incredibly well. It's only about 2.3 million at the moment, so it's not actually that expensive compared to some other neighbours like your Chiraks, like your Kooyongs, like your Caulfields, all those sorts of suburbs nearby. So, look, great suburb. It's even cheaper, believe it or not, than St Kilda West, and it's a better suburb than it. So that's pretty crazy. Another suburb I want to consider above 2 million is a suburb called Hawthorne East. Hawthorne East is in one of the oldest pockets of all of Melbourne and one of the wealthiest old money pockets as well. And he's still picking up for, similar to Albert Park, about 2.2 to about 2.5 million, something like that. Obviously, your homes that look like this one are probably your $5, $6, $7, $8 million properties, but you're not getting much better than that in all of Melbourne for it. But the reason I like it is because it's such an old money area and has such a strong community. Now, Hawthorne East is near all the good schools, close to Scotch College, Melbourne Girls, Caulfield Grammar, Camberwell. All the best schools in Melbourne are basically right next to, even St Catherine's. They're all right near Hawthorne East, and it's basically old money, all that area. Great large blocks, very quiet. A lot of very wealthy internationals want to buy there too, and a lot of very wealthy people from Melbourne want to buy there too. It's very similar to Kew, but it's just a lot cheaper. So this is just an article here from Domain. So I just said, old money, strong community. Hawthorne East, why families are drawn to this suburb, strong community vibe. And that's perfectly summed up of what the suburb is. So Hawthorne East, another really good suburb, and it's also in the lower $2 million range. So I haven't even gone crazy with this for people that want great suburbs that have that kind of money. Great suburb to buy in for everyone. But we're getting to the end of this episode, so I just want to say thanks to everyone, and please subscribe to the channel and check out my website. You can book me via a online consult just through my website, or just reach out if you're really serious about getting the market. So I'm here to help you. Plenty of 5-star Google reviews online if you want to have a look for any of that. No problems at all. But anyway, look, for everyone as well serious, also sign up to Premier Properties on my website. Look, it's properties with above a total return of 13%. That is 30-year capital growth from CoreLogic, RP data, plus your immediate gross rental yield. The reason you want that is because your internal rate of return longer term is higher when you have a higher capital growth percentage of your total return than your rental yield. So especially if you can get over 9%, your internal rate of return over 20 years is probably going to be close to 11 or 12% than it will, rather than under 10 if you go, let's say, 7% yield and 6% growth. And the reason for that is because capital growth in your best suburbs will do 7 to 10%, whereas yield can only do 3 to 4 long term. So one exponentially outdoes the other, which means over the time yield slides down, but capital growth doesn't. So you want that to be the higher proportion of that. All right. So, and I can describe why yield slides down. If yield kept up with capital growth over the long term, the average home in Australia would probably yield $2,500 to $3,000, and it doesn't. It yields about $650 to $700 a week. So that's basically why. But anyway, there's some information for you. Subscribe to the channel, sign up for Premier Properties, and please reach out. Thanks again.